My name is Garrett Rose, Director of Photography for Queer Eye, and you're listening to the Go Creative Show.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Consoli. I'm a director and owner of BC Media Productions, and this is the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. So today we're talking with Garrett Rose. He's the Director of Photography for Queer Eye on Netflix, and our episode is basically dedicated to cinema verite and shooting docuseries. What does that mean, and what kind of challenges does Garrett face? I mean, a lot of times he's in situations and locations he either hasn't ever seen before, or if he has, had very little time with. He doesn't have a lot of opportunity to pre-light or light at all in some cases. So the situations that he's in his docuseries work and his cinema verite work are pretty much the exact same situations that I've been in many, many times. And I know a lot of you have too. So there's a lot to learn in this episode. And Garrett does a great job of explaining his techniques and ways to overcome those challenges. OpenReel is giving our audience a 10% off discount. And OpenReel is the system that I use to do remote filmmaking with iPhones. It's a fantastic system, so check it out at openreel.com. And if you end up purchasing it, let them know that you heard about it from me, Ben Consoli, or Go Creative Show, and you get 10% off. So that's a great deal. Yeah, that's it. Let's dive in because we've got a lot to talk about with Garrett Rose, the Director of Photography for Queer Eye, talking about cinema verite and shooting docuseries. So I'm here with Garrett Rose, Director of Photography for Queer Eye on Netflix. Garrett, welcome to the Go Creative Show.
Well, thank you for having me on the Go Creative Show.
What a fun show Queer Eye must be to work on. I mean, it's just silliness. It's touching. It's emotional. It's just fun. You get to travel. You did the Japan season as well, which I certainly want to get into. But what a great show. How did you first get involved in it?
Well, I first got involved with Queer Eye after Jen Lane, who is one of the EPs and showrunner, reached out to me. And I did seasons 1 and 2 in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I would go on to do subsequent seasons later. But yeah, I was just reached out to by Jennifer Lane.
Did you have a relationship with her beforehand, or?
I did not have a relationship with her prior to the show. Prior to the show starting, I met with her at the production offices here in LA. And we spoke a bit, and that's kind of how it started. I kind of just met with her, spoke with her. She asked me about my previous work experiences, what I was into, cinematographer talk, because she's a cinematographer in her own right. She was formerly a cinematographer, and now she's a producer. So she's very knowledgeable in that regard. Yeah. And that's how it came to be.
Do you, is it a good thing for you as a director of photography to have somebody that really understands the craft?
Yeah, for me, working with someone who does understand the craft, especially someone who's a former cinematographer, it's good for me because we can use the same language. A lot of times when we're talking about the projects that we work on, sometimes it's hard to convey certain ideas. But if you guys speak the same language, the cinematographic language, then you can convey those ideas a little bit better. So I appreciated a lot of the input that she had, and I grew on that show myself from working with her. So yeah, definitely. Same thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, finish your thought.
I was going to say similarly, on the Japan season, the director, he himself, Hisham Abed, was a cinematographer first. I guess I could say first. I'll let him say whether or not it's first or second, but he is also quite competent in that area. So having a director who can speak the same language is great,
What to kind of walk me through that conversation you had with the showrunner when you first got approached to do the show? I mean, she obviously liked your work, otherwise you wouldn't have got called in the first place, but do you know, were you being considered among other directors of photography? Did you have to pitch yourself? What was that conversation like?
Well, the conversation, honestly, I didn't have to pitch myself per se. It was kind of more about meeting with her, talking with her. She wanted to know my influences, what I was, kind of my style of cinematography, I guess. She wanted to know my background. So I think all of these things really informed her decision on picking me. I wouldn't say it was specifically because of a specific piece of work. It was more like a vibe, I guess you would say. I mean, obviously I had to be competent in some regard, but it wasn't super formal. Like I didn't have to come with I guess like samples of my work. I mean, she may have done her own research, but when I met her, it was more just getting to know who I was as a person.
Now, Queer Eye is obviously a reboot, or maybe not obviously for people that aren't familiar with it, but it's a reboot of a previous reality show called Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, with a pretty long hiatus in between the original series and this series. So when you're thinking about the visuals of the new season or the reboot, are you comparing it at all to the previous series, or are you coming at it completely fresh?
Well, in some regards, we do. We look at it, with fresh eyes, only because it is a reboot. You're having to reconceptualize how you want to craft this show for a newer audience. So if you compare and contrast Queer Eye for the Straight Guy versus with Queer Eye, it's my opinion that you'll find that it's a lot more. It goes a lot deeper into specific issues, and I did get this sense for the producers that they really wanted to tackle certain topics, and they were using the show kind of as a platform for that. So on top of like the redressing people or showing them how to cook, or it gets very personal at times, and that's because they wanted to make it a little bit more than what it was before. So,
what kind of dog do you have?
Sorry, that is not my dog. Hold on one second.
It reminds me of my not. I guess it was a childhood dog. We've had it from when I was a very young teenager, but it's like a little white Bichon, but the barks are very yippy and high pitched. So it's like giving me flashbacks to those days.
Yeah, those would be my neighbors. That would not be my dog, but yeah.
All right. So this series, they want to tackle issues. And figuring out like how that's different from the original series and all that conceptually is good. How are you approaching it from a cinematography standpoint?
Well, from a cinematography standpoint, ultimately we are dealing with something that is happening organically and in the moment. This is Verite. So when we discuss how I approach the cinematography of the show, a lot of times it's trying to use the power of the camera that I'm using itself. Like we are using the Sony FS7, which it's a how do I say this? It is more capable than cameras we would have used before because we have the Super 35 sensor. So there's a certain cinematic quality that is innate to that camera when compared to cameras from years earlier, like the 2/3 inch cameras. Yep. So I'm leaning on that heavily when we're in these Verite situations, because viewers are often used to that, 2/3 inch reality style, shooting at whatever f-stop so you can get exposure. So you're not really shooting cinematically. Now, when we do Verite, I have to keep in mind that we have to be truthful to what's happening in the moment right then and there. But you also have to keep in mind that you want to shoot it cinematically. So I might make a choice to purposely underexpose something, or just flat out let the camera work, because these are very capable cameras. So we don't light as much in Verite as maybe other shows do, because one, we may not have the time. We're running through so much stuff during the day, and two, you kind of destroy it when you add too. Like my thing is, lately I've been trying to not add as many lights and just let the camera work. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it does. I mean, you're kind of taking a naturalist approach. Not that wasn't the case prior, but you made the choice to do a 35 millimeter camera. You made the choice to have a more cinematic look. I think it shows itself in the cinematography. And I personally am extremely familiar with that FS7. We use the FS7 quite a bit here at my own production company where I am. And Chris Lochran, my director of photography for almost all the stuff I do, that's his camera as well. So it's such a versatile camera for really everything. We've done it for commercials. We've done it for documentary style. It's a great camera.
It is a great camera. And when you bring that into the Verite space, it can do wonderful things. So, I mean, we shoot, Sony Log, which is the EI mode. And it does great stuff. Really does great stuff. Yeah.
So you're doing S-Log 3, you're saying, and Cine EI. Okay, so S-Log3 and Cine AI. So obviously everything has to be colored, and you must have hours and hours and hours of footage. Even before I get there, because I do want to talk about post-production, but before I even get there, the choice for the FS7. First of all, how many cameras do you have on set with you for a typical episode?
Typical episode, we'll have 3 operators, and we'll have as many as 4 cameras. The fourth body we'll typically use for B-roll. Or if we get in a situation like I lens a camera with the 17 to 120, which is once you build out the FS7, the camera's a good 3 feet long, including hops, wireless transmitter, camera body, matte box, 17 to 120 cinema style ENG zooms, which is a heavy, long lens. So that fourth body, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll mount it with a Metabones adapter, and we'll slap we will put on an EF mount lens on it. And what that'll allow us to do is really tight situations. We can still use the FS7, but we will be like in a closet somewhere. Like say Tan runs into a closet and you just have to get in there and he's going through the rack of clothes. A lot of times what will happen is the 2 subjects will close off, and you can't really disturb that too much because you want it to happen organically. So you as the camera person, you kind of have to pivot around them, and having the ability to go from a 17 to 120, which is about a foot long, maybe even slightly longer, to an EF photo lens, it just gives you that latitude to put yourself in situations where you just don't have the footprint to get in. Like in one point in Japan, myself and my Baker operator, we were in a little nook. And I have a photo, I'll send it to you later. But it's 2 of us, side to side. Both of our cameras have, EF glass on it, photo glass. And we're just doing our best to get the coverage that we can. It's a very organic show where the Verite is concerned. And that's what makes it really good. There's been a lot of times on that show. We'll probably get to this a little bit later. But while it's on my mind, I'll say it. There's been a lot of times on that show where you're shooting. And as you're shooting, tears are just coming down your eyes, because they do try to preserve that as much as possible, and that's really the main goal. So we'll have a variety of tools that we'll use. Sometimes we'll even use an Alpha 7, Sony AS7 to shoot. So it's about using your toolbox.
Tears coming down your eyes. How do you mean? Are you getting emotional in the moment, or is the equipment so heavy you can't take it anymore? Where is it coming from?
Well, fortunately enough, the Sony FS7 isn't like the Vericam, so it's a lot lighter.
Yeah.
So as for tears holding the camera too long, we don't get those. It's definitely the momentum, the emotional momentum of the scene. Because, a lot of times, like we as camera people, we are reacting to this in the fly as well. We're not privy to what's going to happen because it is so organic. So I remember one case in particular, we were following talent in Philadelphia, Rihanna, and she's a dog groomer. She put all of her life savings into this mobile dog grooming business, and life had thrown a few punches at her, and we were there. The Fab Five was there to help bring some life back to her. And the reveal that we did that day, I'm here trying to hold my shot, and just I want to reach up and rub my eye, And when I look over my Baker operator, Susan Young, same thing. All of us were just out there red-eyed, Yeah. It's a show.
You can't help it. The show really does give you those moments. What is a Baker operator? You said it twice now, and I'm not sure what it is.
Oh, it's just, the different operators that you have in the camera department. So I would be A, I'd be Alpha. Next operator would be Baker.
Oh, so just like B cam, but you're giving it.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I've never heard that term before.
Some people say B. Some of us use the phonetic alphabet. It just goes show to show. It's just camera culture. Some will say Alpha, Bravo, Charlie.
Yeah.
Yeah, or they might say Baker instead of Bravo. It's just a way of naming the operators. Oh. And the reason why I say A and B is so because if I say Susan Young, you would not know who she is. But if I say my Baker operator, then immediately it tells you it was the second op.
Yep. No, yeah. that makes sense. I just never heard of that. I've certainly heard of A, B, C cams, all that, but I never heard it referred to as Baker, so that's interesting. I want to talk about the style of Verite. Like, I think a lot of people hear that word, and if they haven't worked on a project like that, or even if they've seen it and didn't really necessarily think about it in their mind as Verite, explain to us kind of what that means and what are the elements that make cinematography Verite?
All right. Well, Verite, as far as I know, and maybe some people will challenge me on this, Verite was a movement of or style of filming that originated in the 60s, and I believe it was French cinema. So back in the day, the cameras were so heavy that you never really took the, like, you remember the big blimps, the old Panavision style cameras, they were on like massive dollies because they were heavy. Well, as camera technology improved and the cameras became lighter, now it became the thing versus bringing the action to the camera, you brought the camera to the action. And that's what cinema verite was. Cinematographers back then would take their, 16Ss and they would go shoot the action as it was happening organically, right? So this is what we call verite. I would use verite and docu-follow synonymous with each other. Documentary, docu-follow, meaning you follow the action. That's kind of what verite is as well. Or maybe not kind of, that is what verite is. So when I say cinema verite, I'm using the term to mean docu-follow, meaning that we are going in with our FS7s and we're shooting it as organically as possible. Certainly there's times where we might need to pick up an insert or something like that. But generally speaking, we are following the action. Like on those days that the Fab Five, they run into the house and they discover the person that they're going to work with, and they're just discovering the various aspects of the individual, their identity, how they live. This is all hyper organic, right? Is, me and the operators running around, trying to catch what we can catch. And that's cinema verite. It's not staged. A lot of times you'll have reality shows, like let's say a docu-soap, for example. A docu-soap is very rarely verite. It's a soap opera in the documentary format. So things tend to be a little bit more controlled.
What show would you say is a docu-soap?
Like any of the Love and Hip Hops, the Housewives, the shows that you might, these type of shows where, So, and those shows, they tend to be a little bit more like controlled in a sense, like where things are going to happen. Whereas on the day that we enter the house with the Fab Five, it's pretty much a free for all. This is super organic. These guys are going in and they're, it's all real. So that's what I mean.
I want to talk a little bit about just your process and technique and how you make sure that you get the shots. I mean, you're shooting cinema verite. You're not staging anything. You're staging very little. You have to get the shot. I mean, it's almost like news gathering where you just have to get the shot sometime. You get 3 cameras, sometimes in extremely small spaces. I sort of refreshed myself on the show a little bit. And this morning I rewatched the first episode of the Japan season. And I can't remember the woman's name, but the house was really small. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my God, like if I'm sure you had the widest lenses you could possibly have. You had as much space as you possibly have, but it was a small home. And thinking you get the 5 guys in there, you have the owner of the home, the subject of the whole episode, 3 camera operators. Like, I want to dive into the workflow here and how you approach each episode.
Okay, so each episode runs. There's a little bit of a format. Like, we understand there's going to be a day where the guys run into the house. That day is our biggest day. When the Fab Five, they enter the person's home or place of business for the first time, we know as operators it's going to be hyper dynamic. And because we've done this before, you understand that at this point we've done several seasons. So we kind of, and we use the same operators more or less. Susan Young has been on the show for all 5 seasons, and she's currently on the 6th, if I'm not mistaken. So after so long of shooting the show, you kind of have a 6th sense as to where the guys are going to be, how they're going to react. So then what we'll do is we'll kind of get a game plan together. I'll speak with my Baker operator, Susan Young, and I'll say, okay, I think these guys, when they walk in, they're going to go this way, or they're going to go this, or Susan might know JVN may specifically want to see this thing just based on our prior experience. So we get a game plan going, and then we'll kind of strategize that way, where I'll say, I'll stay in the main room. I'll receive them coming in through the front door. You supplement me, 180 degree, 30 degrees apart for coverage, and you get what you can get. And if they happen to bone past me and go into the kitchen, you'll be positioned there to receive them. So it's kind of like it's like playing a game of football or something. I mean, I'm not really a sports fan, but you have to strategize in that regard. So that's how we approach the coverage. And then we do have 3 operators because we'll also have a Charlie operator. So the Charlie operator might be upstairs. So if one of the Fab Five, they go upstairs, we have someone to receive them there. In the case of the what was it? Episode 1 of Japan.
Yeah.
It was very tight. And we kind of just had to make it work. Like, we listen in on the audio and we figure which conversations are we want to cover. And then my operator and I will look at each other, we'll hand signal each other, and then we'll fall in and cover what we deem to be the most important, or we'll get instruction from our producers who will let us know what they need.
So those 5 guys, they come in and you don't know where they're going to go. They just are like,
absolutely not.
You just open the floodgates and they go wherever they go.
We don't know where they're going to go. We don't know what they're going to find. We don't know how they're going to react. So you really have to be alert, and you have to have your senses open. So like when I'm shooting, I shoot with my right eye. My left eye is looking around to see what else is going to go on, because I will literally shoot. Like, imagine this is the camera. I have got my eye in the eyepiece. This eye is constantly scanning back and forth. And on occasion, I'll pop up and look over my camera to see what my other operators are doing, what's going on that side, because in a moment you will have to then pan to what's going on elsewhere, depending on how important it is. So.
You said something interesting just a minute ago about how you're listening to the audio and you're deciding which conversations you're going to pick up. So you're hearing everything, all 5 mics or 6 mics? You're getting everything?
Let me think about this. Let me see how to answer this. The audio person is listening to everything, and they're podding up in my camera specific conversations. So I guess what I should say is the audio person is talking with producers. They're going back and forth because the producers have IFBs, and then the message is coming down what is more important later. And then I'm going to whatever's important. But there's often times where you, as a camera person, you have to decide for whatever reason. Maybe cast is far away or something is happening right now in the moment, which it might take too long to come down the ladder, but you know it's important, so you'll go to that instead.
Wow. I mean, I'm just thinking of the conditions. Like, you get the camera, you have to manage the other operators, you're getting information from your producers and your audio techs in here, and just constantly just feeling out the environment and where these guys are going to go. Like, do you sort of, like, is there one of the 5 guys or 2 of the 5 guys that you usually go to and you sort of are more in tune to what their patterns are? Or are
negative?
Wow.
No, you have to, I'm
trying to think of any shortcut I can so that you don't have to just like be thrown into the wolves every episode.
No, I mean, it's fun because to be honest, it's actually fun. So again, it's Verite, so it's an uber dynamic environment. I can't just stick with one person, because let's say Anthony is in the kitchen and he's having a great conversation with our hero. We call him a hero, our hero for the episode. If Susan Young is there, she'll be on top of it. Even if I have a great relationship with Anthony, she's already there. She might have the Charlie operator there, and they'll tackle that together. And I may go off into the bedroom with and he'll look through the closet or something like that. So it's a hyper dynamic environment, and you're just kind of working as a team to get the content that you need. And it requires someone who's very alert and open. That's why Susan Young is great. She's really, really, really good at this. And you're going to hear me call her name a number of times on this podcast, because again, she's great. She's been there 5 seasons, and yeah.
Who is on set? Obviously you are, the other camera operators. The 5 guys, the hero. Do you have producers on set? Do you have directors on set? Like,
So all of our cameras are equipped with wireless video transmitters. So because of the nature of the spaces that we enter, oftentimes they're quite small. Sometimes they're even quite small for the operators themselves. So what'll end up happening is audio might be outside on the rare occasion. Oftentimes they're inside with us. But producers may be in a video village placed outside the location, or sometimes they might be in the location. You know, they might be tucked away in a closet somewhere. They may be tucked away outside on the porch. It's just wherever we can put video village. But video village is ideally outside of the field, if you will.
Do you ever scout locations ahead of time?
Yeah. So after we do the initial ambush, and the boys will go on their various field trips. You know, Tan might take someone shopping. Anthony may take someone to a local restaurant where they learn how to cook local fare. Javian does, his haircut thing. Bobby will go to a design store. Karama will have like an intimate one-on-one. These things we're able to scout ahead of time often. And the scouts do help because, again, it gives you a game plan as to what's going to happen. I don't know for sure what's going to happen, but seeing the location ahead of time will inform me later on about how to best approach it if I can control certain things. Obviously, there's certain things we attempt to avoid, like blown out windows. We may attempt to put someone in a flattering light, but generally speaking, like a flattering natural light that's just happening at location. But generally speaking, it's very organic and they land where they land.
Wow. And what about the actual, like the hero's home or office, that the place where you have that first initial ambush, I think you called it, where you have that first, is that something that you scout ahead of time?
Yeah. So sometimes I'm fortunate enough to scout ahead of time. Other times I might get to location maybe 45 minutes ahead, and I'll go in with my gaffer and my grip, and we'll formulate a game plan as to where to place lights, if we are placing lights, so that it works the best for us. A lot of times, again, harkening back to what I said earlier, my thing is in later seasons of the show is that I would like not to put lights, because a light, to me, in my eye, you can tell it's an artificial light source once it hits your subject. I prefer natural light. A lot of times we don't get that ability to have beautiful natural light. So I'll supplement where I can. So I'll use quasars, I'll use sky panels, I might use light ribbon China balls, and I'll use those strategically where I think I may need them, because I'm dealing with various skin tones. I've got Bobby Burke, who is very reflective, if you will, all the way down to Karama, who absorbs a lot of light. So I have to be very specific about where I put my lights, right? So a lot of times I'll put lights to fight like windows, or where I see a lot of volume of light coming through, so that I have a good shot of equalizing the exposure later on, should people land in this specific spot. So that could be fun as well. I mean, it's...
And you had Karama with the hat on. Hat all the time. I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my God, he's in a place that's not lit. He's got a hat on. This is just, it's every problem is being dealt to you. It's crazy.
Right. Well, the great thing about Karama is quite tall, and I'm 5'9", and Susie Young is probably 5'6". So a lot of times we're slightly looking up at him, so we're looking up under the brim. So we get lucky in that regard for sure. Also, these guys, Karamo's pretty savvy at this point. So if I look at Karamo too long, he'll realize and he'll do one of these. he'll tip the hat up, and the guys are great about doing that. They're professionals at this point.
I think what's so great about them is, I mean, they're performers. Obviously, they're interesting to watch, and they've got interesting things to say. But you really do get the sense, and I'm sure it's true, that this is just how they would react even if the cameras and lights weren't there. It just seems like them. It doesn't seem like they're really pushing far beyond their normal personalities for TV. It just seems very real.
Yeah, and it seems that way because the show is Verite, and the producers try to keep everything as natural as possible. I feel like, and you'll need to speak with the producer about this to get their input, but I feel like we tend to not touch too much so that the reactions can be organic. So it's about creating that environment. And a lot of times this is what you want when you're doing docu-follow stuff, or anything that's heavy in Verite, is as camera, your philosophy should be to touch as little as possible. Ultimately, we know we have to, because the technology is constrained in such a way where we do need to touch, or coverage may require that we pick up an insert here or there. But the general philosophy is to be a fly on the wall. And the more we do this, the more organic the reactions will be. And that's what we're all there for. So that later, at the end of the show, we can have the cameras on our shoulder and we can cry a little bit when everything is ultimately revealed,
It got me this morning. It did. I'm sitting there drinking coffee, watching it. I'm like, God damn it. It's getting me. It's getting to me.
Yeah.
We got a couple questions from listeners on Instagram. Wilborn Films wants to know, how do you know where to be at any given time with so much going on at once? I think you've hit this a little bit, but maybe just give it again for Wilborn Films. Thank you, Wilborn, for the question. So how do you know? I mean, there's so much going on. Is it just experience? You just get it? You just kind of know where these guys are going to go?
Exactly. It's kind of like experience. So the first thing I'll do is the camera, like, let's tackle the ambush day. The ambush day is the day that the hero and the Fab Five meet for the first time. Typically, I'll arrive at the ambush day earlier than the Fab Five by a few hours. And in that time, what we're doing is we're getting cameras ready. I walk the premises. Cameron and I will walk the premises. We'll walk with our AD. And we'll kind of get a sense of the space. And based on the sense of the space, we will decide how we move forward in tackling this ambush. Because again, we don't know what's going to happen. All we can do is put ourselves in the best positions to cover it as best as possible. So it ends up being, almost like, a strategy. The same way, let me see, how do I answer this? I don't want to say like the military, but much kind of like how, the military might go into a space and look in ahead of time and decide how they might best position themselves is kind of what we have to do. And experience does play a major role, because we might know certain aspects of a member of the Fab Five, and we'll know, like, again, JVN might see something specifically in the house, and we just know from experience he'll beeline it directly there. So we'll position ourselves ahead of time to make, if that gamble does pay off, we're there to receive.
I love that. And we got a question here from Motion in Reverse. This is a great question. Does working on something like a reality show give you more freedom to experiment as a DP? I love this question, and I'm curious what your thoughts are in this. Thank you, Motion in Reverse. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say yes and no. I mean, obviously, there are certain ways that we can experiment, but again, a lot of times we're constrained to the content, and we have to get the content. So we could do very creative things, but in doing that very creative thing, be it a shot, be it a way that we light it, be it a way that we cover it, we could end up missing things. So first and foremost is the content, and the experimentation can come later. But I don't want to say that's not the case, because I've been on several shows where I have been able to experiment. And I credit a lot of the reality shows that I've worked on with building my skill set, because I have been able to experiment on these shows. So it's the answer to the question is like a yes and a no. You can experiment, but content will come first. Yeah.
I think just maybe not even related to Queer Eye in particular, but just reality shows, docu-follow shows, as you were calling it. I love that term. Just in general, like, my guess is that because there's so much coming at you all the time, you really don't, I feel like experimentation will come from the ability to set things up and plan different shots and all that. It seems like you don't have that opportunity to plan, but maybe there's ways to experiment within the structure of Verite that I'm not even thinking of.
Well, there are ways with Queer Eye specifically, there are ways to experiment. I mean, obviously the ambush day is a very dynamic day, but there are days when things are a little bit more subdued. The one-on-ones, for example, in the one-on-ones, we are able to experiment within the context of gathering the content that we need. Like, in order to stitch the scene together, we know there's a few shots that we need. For example, a one-on-one with Karamo, we need wides and we need singles, we need overs, that kind of a thing. Now, when you're doing your wider shots, you can experiment. You can also experiment with your lighting on those days, because you have a little bit more room to manipulate the situation. Whereas, let's go back to Karamo and his hat, for example. Like, say we're shooting in broad daylight, which they did in Japan. I wasn't on this particular scene, but I think the operators did a really good job at placing our subjects. Karamo is of a darker complexion, and he wears a hat. So Karamo's not someone that you'd want to shoot backlit necessarily. So in that sense, you have the ability to position and experiment that way with the lighting. All right. And this will also have to fall into how you plan on shooting your wides, because you're having to think about multiple shots at once. You're not lighting for one shot. You're not positioning or blocking for one shot. You're having to block for several shots. And this is where your skill set as an operator comes in, because you have to quickly discern where you're going to put or stage your subjects so that all the shots work. And this is kind of the game that ends up happening in reality. And this is why it's a great tool for building your cinematic eye. because you're having to deal with a lot of situations that are coming at you like this, and you have to build a repertoire of shots. You kind of see what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I think you've achieved cinematic looks with the kind of pace that you are working within all the time. I think that we have a question. I know that. Hold on, let me see. Somebody asked about the look here. Katie Williams on Instagram. How do you shoot something happening in real time and keep it cinematic looking? And I'd love to use this as a jumping off point to dive a little bit deeper into lighting. I know we talked briefly about it, but I want to get a little bit more into how you're actually achieving these looks. Something that it was reminiscent to me a little bit of Parts Unknown, Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown. I got a little bit of that in some of the B-roll and the environmental stuff.
Yeah.
Particularly the scene and the it's just fresh in my mind because I saw it this morning, but the scene in the restaurant for the first episode of the Japan series where everything's kind of top lit and the sushi's like that, whether that was something you created or just the look of the restaurant itself, I feel like you're able to incorporate cinematic moments within this show that make it stand out beyond just a typical reality show or docu-follow or something like that. So a long-winded question, but again, thank you, Katie. And her question, just to bring it back to it, how do you shoot something happening in real time and keep it cinematic looking?
Again, it goes back to the different segments that we have within the show. There are some segments which are uber dynamic, and there are other segments, the one-on-ones in particular, which can be a little bit more controlled. So if I had to address the question of how I make things look cinematic in a much more dynamic environment, I'm a still photographer in my hobbies, and I carry over that philosophy with me into Verite. So a lot of times what I'll look to shoot the shadow side before I shoot the flat side. Now there's merits to both, because oftentimes shooting the flat side of a scene can work depending on what it is that you're shooting. But my first default thing is to look for the shadow side of a scene, or look for the shadow side of my subject, because that helps to model their face, and that looks innately more cinematic than shooting the flat side. So that's my first go-to. So if I'm shooting Verite and I have my camera and I'm approaching a scene, what will often happen is I'll speak, and my B operators typically know this on all the shows that I do. We kind of have a game plan, because remember, content is first. So we have to get it, because we don't want to miss anything that happens. So a lot of times what will happen is someone will shoot a wide shot, and then if it's myself or my B operator, we'll formulate a plan to find the angle that's most attractive, hold the wide shot there. It's like a hop and a skip. And then the first camera operator who laid the first shot is now moving to match my shot after I found the cinematic angle. That's kind of the game plan that I have for the much more dynamic scenes. It doesn't always happen that way, but that's what I do first.
Yeah, and I think, that's certainly a great way to approach filming, by shooting toward the shadow side. I totally see what you mean by having that be more cinematic. I love that. But you still, we're shooting on the FS7, like we mentioned earlier. You're shooting with nice glass, You're making all those, decisions that have a shot, that make a shot look more cinematic. Can you give us a couple of little strategies that you may employ on a regular basis, along the same lines as shooting towards the shadow? Is there something else? Are you trying to shoot as wide open as possible so you can have a softer background? What are some of the things you're doing to make sure that you're giving it as much of a cinematic look as you can?
So we do shoot with the FS7 Mark IIs, and I believe this particular model has the variable ND. So what the variable ND will allow us to do is to shoot wide open. A lot of times what will happen is when you're shooting, you'll have to roll the filters to add ND, but with the variable ND, off dialogue, you can fade in ND and adjust your iris so that you're shooting wide open. That's one thing that we like to do.
And it's an internal variable MD, which is awesome. Yeah. I have that on the FS5, and I absolutely love it. It's such a great tool.
Internal variable NDs. We use polarizers outside. I like to enrich in skin tones. Oftentimes we don't get to use them inside, because again, we are dealing with an environment that's very dynamic. So because I can't do as much control, I won't use the polarizers inside for skin tone, but typically I would. Yeah. And
What does a polarizer do to skin tone?
For me, it enriches the skin tone, especially like for someone like Karamo. You're able to dial out the blue light. So with darker skin tones, blue light reads differently. So typically I'll like warm up lights or try to find a way to take away blue. And by using the polarizer on darker skin tones, you get a richer skin tone because you're able to dial the blue light out. Darker skin tones reflect blue light. This is why, like, how do I say this? I don't know if I want to say that. Yeah, never mind.
Well, I've never really heard of polarizers being used for skin. I mean, I've heard them, outside, reflections, yada, yada, but I never heard it for skin tone. That's interesting.
Well, blue light reflects on skin tone. So you can improve a skin tone by dialing out the blue light. The polarizer polarizes the light and takes away that blue sheen. Yeah. So it can enrich skin tones as well. Yeah.
All right. So shooting it wide open as you can using the variable ND, polarizers when possible, even indoors for skin tone, shooting towards the shadow side. Was there any other things that you're kind of telling your operators to think about at all times?
I like upstage light. This goes back to shooting with shooting the shadow side. In general, I like upstage light because I feel the rakes that I get on objects, be it a door, a table, I really do like that. So when I can, I'll try to do that. So there'll be many times where I'm shooting a scene and I'll call over walkie to have my gaffer throw up a sky panel outside to shoot light back in the house. And it's something that it's an art. You have to finagle it because you don't want to disturb the scene too much. So you have to use your discretion as a cinematographer as to when to do that. Because remember, you're doing two roles. Your first role is to shoot the content. Second role is to make it look nice. Mm-hmm. So you have to use your judgment in that regard to decide when is it a time to introduce a light and when is it a time to just let it live. And there's merits to both. Because oftentimes I'll see footage from maybe if I'm not present, I'll see footage from Susan Young. And I'll say, well, if it was me, I probably would have done this. But after seeing her, meaning to introduce an upstage light. But after seeing some of her work, I'm like, okay, well, that's great too. I also like that. With my camera department, I tend to be very fluid with how I want them to do things because I do want people in my camera department to feel empowered to make the best creative decisions that they'll make. So we discuss what we're shooting. We discuss how we shoot it. We discuss the aesthetic, but I also leave room there for them to use their own eye. And I think that also helps build the quality of the show.
I love that. I want to talk about lighting just a little bit more. Mm-hmm. What is your approach to lighting while also maintaining this clearly the most realistic look we possibly can? But, you want it to be organic, you want it to be authentic, but at the same time, you do have to light sometimes. So
we do.
Talk to us about your strategy.
Yeah, again, my strategy is super organic. It really depends on where I land and how I land. I have to see the space first and foremost, and once I see the space, I get a game plan there in my head. And it sometimes it might be slow to realize. Like I will be in a scene and I'll realize that, oh man, I could throw up a 1x1 here, and this will help. This will affect this quality of the image, by adjusting the differential in exposure. So it's very organic, to be honest with you. The only time I get very specific about my lighting outside of Verite is, say, interviews, because that's something I have absolute control over, whereas Verite, I don't. So in Verite, my lighting style is first and foremost very organic because I love natural light. If I can use natural ambient light from outside first, I will do that. If I need to introduce a unit, the goal is to make the light as soft and natural as possible, because in my head, a unit reads as a unit if it's not soft. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll try to introduce a unit in the scene that's as large as possible, because the larger the source, the softer the quality of light, which often means I have to move the unit in, because moving the unit in to the subjects helps to make the source bigger in relation to the subject. So we'll use light mats. I like to use light mat 4. I like to use light mat 2L. I try to stay away from smaller units such as 1x1s because it reads as a light source, and that's one of my biggest pet peeves.
Yeah. How big is the light mat? How wide does it go?
So the light mat is about 3 feet by 2 feet, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, and it comes with various layers of diffusion, so I'll use the heaviest one. And I'll oftentimes turn them on until they just pop on, so that it's a very subtle effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like to be more subtle. I don't really like to use very punchy lights. There are a few scenes where the lights might seem a bit punchy because I wasn't able to make the adjustments that I needed to make prior to the scene happening. But that's the nature of reality, and that's the game. And then this is how you build your skill set, Yeah. A little negative, Phil.
I know. As we're talking about it, I'm looking like, oh, it's looking a little green. But luckily, my box in the screen is very small compared to yours. So if anybody's noticing the green light on here, what are you going to do?
Oh, sorry to tack on. I just had another thought.
No, go ahead.
As far as lighting the Verite things, if I get into a big space, I like big ambient top lit kind of things. Right. So we'll put a sky panel in the ceiling if I can rig it in the ceiling, and I'll put maybe a Jolico, which is a source, it's a 800 watt Joker bug. You can put a Jolico adapter on it, and now it turns your HMI into a very directional ellipsoidal light. So you carve out little pieces. So I might use that Lico to maybe edge someone if there's a strong daylight source in the background, like say windows.
Yeah.
Another way that we use the Jolico is I'll cut it into a 4x8 bounce. Because again, the bigger, the better, the more subtle is kind of what I try to look for. I try to replicate when I can.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll park that Jolico deep upstage and shoot it into a 4x8 card downstage of the subject, basically over my head, and that'll radiate back very soft to kind of fill them in a little bit.
Yeah, so you're kind of bouncing that light towards the subject.
Yeah. I mean, we have a variety of tools which we can use, so every situation is very different. So there might be days where I go, Jolico into a 4x8 card. There may be days where I'll rely solely on a sky panel, and there will be days where I use Titan tubes. It really just depends on the space that I'm in, and this is why it's important to walk into this space and get a sense of the space ahead of time. You don't necessarily need to scout days ahead. I mean, that does help, but I'm able to do my job with a few hours notice. I can walk into the space, get a sense of the volume, because light is, voluminous.
Yeah.
And it's a nature. So being in the space physically is something that I need to do if I'm to have a good game plan. A lot of times I'll get pictures. Pictures really don't do me justice. I need to be in the space to feel the space. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. So the crew that you're traveling with, do you what's the makeup of your G&E department on just a regular day?
Okay. Well, it varies. We utilize our G&E department based on what we're doing for the day. But generally speaking, I'll have a gaffer, and they'll have another G&E type, like an electrician / gaffer, who can give them a hand. We have a cargo truck which has all the tools that we need. It has our lighting control, and we bring that truck with us everywhere we go in the event that we need to bring out a light. But generally speaking, it stays parked outside. Yes, it'll stay parked outside until we need something out of it.
I imagine you have to be pretty nimble and fast moving on a show like this.
Yes, you do. You have to be very quick, and this is what helps build your skill set as a cinematographer too. Like I really do believe that people who start off in this type of work build their skills very quickly because you're forced to. And you do end up early on, you might, shoot a lot of things that you don't feel is indicative of the style of work or quality of work that you can do. But you build a skill set very, very quickly because you're having to adjust. You're having to make those calls on the fly. And it's a great experience. It's a great way to build your skill set.
In our last couple of minutes, I want to talk about post-production and your involvement in that. Talk to me about that. So the show is over. The episode's done, however you break it up. What is the next step for you? And are you involved in post at all? Any coloring work for you or what?
I am not involved in post whatsoever, unfortunately.
Unfortunately. So you prefer to be?
I don't have a history of being involved in post.
Is that just normal for reality shows?
Lately it has been. I'm coming into an era where that is definitely the case. There are much more tenured DPs than me who are involved in post. They tend to be director DPs. Me as solely a DP, I'm not typically involved in post.
Well, that must be, it must be kind of nice to just sort of hand over the footage and say that's it, and then just trust that everybody is going to have you back and make it look the best that it can.
Well, it really depends on the production company. Again, going back to Queer Eye, Jen Lane is, herself, she's a cinematographer.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Right. So I'm fortunate in that regard, and she's got oversight of the post process in general. So there's a lot of times where I'll feel a certain way about what we shot on set, and she'll reassure me that they will make the requisite adjustments in post, and that'll help assuage my fears or my hangups. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing when you're doing anything like this, certainly Verite, documentary, even when you're working with professional talent, is making sure that they feel comfortable. And
yes,
a lot of that onus is on the camera operators, and just making sure that you balance your needs with also their expectations. I mean, you're working with 5 professional talent, obviously. The Fab Five know what they're doing. They understand camera and lights and being, performing. But
correct.
The heroes don't, So
I was just going to say that we're working with a 6th one who's not aware. And sometimes, the footprint of having a whole crew come in can do disservice to what you're attempting to do. So a lot of times we may have to elect to lens it, meaning that we shoot on the longer end of our lens. Or I might sneak into a room very quietly and position myself on my knees to shoot the shot of someone in a very emotional state. So being a cinematographer in reality isn't just knowing how to operate a camera. It's not just knowing how to light. It's not just knowing blocking and coverage. It's also being aware of people's states and knowing how to cover it without stepping on it too much. Sometimes it might be better to have one camera in a situation. You might forego the level of coverage that you want, but to get the content that you need that rings true to the person and their experience, you got to work with very soft hands. I was going to say that's why it's good to have very experienced operators on your crew. So yeah. Like Susan Young, for example.
There you go. Susan Young's name has been dropped more than anybody. We might as well just title this whole thing, We Love Susan Young.
Right.
No, I feel like I got to have Susan Young on the show. We've talked about her so much.
Oh, she's great. She's a great person. And she's very, again, going back to these situations, she's very delicate and open, and she's got that emotional intelligence where she's able to read the situations oftentimes a little bit quicker than I am. So even though I'm the DP, sometimes I take my lead from her, because she's very much alert in a way that maybe I'm not. Because I could be worried about a Titan tube in the ceiling that I got to watch, or have my gaffer bring in, and she's, as the B operator, she's in a different space as she's shooting, so she'll oftentimes see things that maybe I don't. I'll say that's why it's important to empower your camera crew.
Yeah. And I'm getting that a lot from you as you're talking. It's a lot about giving them freedom. Certainly, guiding them and giving them some direction, but allowing them the freedom to find the shots that they think are the right shots.
Correct.
Well, I absolutely love it. The show is fantastic. It's called Queer Eye. It's on Netflix. There are how many? 5 finished seasons, and you're working on the 6th now? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, there's 5 finished seasons. The 6th is on the way, but due to recent events, COVID, I think it may be backed up.
Yeah. That show, like every other show, basically.
Correct. Yeah.
Are you guys thinking about perhaps like moving it to another country where there may be a little bit less restrictive?
That's not for me to say. I'm not involved in those decision-making processes, but that wouldn't be a bad idea, although I don't know if Americans will be allowed to
Well, that's
travel
the thing, too.
Yeah.
Nobody wants us.
Yeah, apparently so. We got to start wearing our masks.
Oh, my God, I know. All right, Garrett Rose, Director of Photography for Queer Eye and a whole bunch of other stuff. Where can people go to find out more about you? I see your Instagram here. Is that the best thing?
That really is the best thing. GARose21 on Instagram. That's where I do a lot of my social media stuff. And right now, it's the only thing I really use.
There it is. And I'm actually seeing a ton of great stills on here, too. You mentioned before, photography is your love. So just scrolling through it, you got some really beautiful stuff here. So everybody should be following you if they aren't already. GAROSE21 on Instagram. Garrett, thank you so much for being on and talking to us all about your show.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and I hope I was able to answer the questions as you gave them to me.
You certainly did. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you.
All right. I want to thank Garrett Rose for coming on the show and talking about his work filming Queer Eye, the docuseries, and his Cinema Verite techniques and approach. Like, I learned so much from this episode because this is the kind of stuff that I have to deal with on a regular basis, and I know that you guys do too. So I hope you learned a lot, and let us know what you think of the episode. I also want to thank our producer, Connor Crosby, for pulling all of this together behind the scenes, and of course, Matt Russell for mixing and mastering and making the show sound so good. You can find Connor at ignitionvisuals.com, and you can find Matt at gainstructure.com. Of course, all things Go Creative Show are at gocreativeshow.com. Links to all of our social media, and of course, a way to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And of course, you should be following me as well, because I'm always posting my behind-the-scenes photos and videos all over Instagram. You can find me at Ben Consoli across Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and all the rest. So thank you guys so much for listening to the Go Creative Show. We love putting this show on for you every week, and so thankful that you are supporting and sharing and enjoying the show. And I also encourage you to support our sponsors, because without them, the show wouldn't happen. So please support those that support us. And that's MZ, Education for Creatives, and PostLab, stress-free collaboration in Final Cut Pro 10 and Premiere. All right, that's it for us now, but we'll see you next week on another episode of Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers.